Realize I'm here again. All right. So starting our afternoon, we have such an amazing workshop. I'm so excited for it. But yeah, so for our workshop, we have Aimee with Understanding Context Workshop. Aimee is a senior consultant at Fathom Consulting and works for nonprofit to Fortune 500 companies to solve problems through human-centric facilitation, research, and design. Her background spans nonprofit startups, policy. Aimee holds a BA from Brown University and an executive certificate in social innovation design from the University of Pennsylvania. She's an adventurous foodie, an e-bike enthusiast, and strongly believes we do better when we do better. So let's welcome Aimee. I'll do that. Do a little this and this and this. Hi everyone. Let's see. Let's almost there. Okay. We'll just do it the old-fashioned way. We don't need clickers. All right. Hi everyone. I'm Aimee. I'm a design thinker. I'm a workshop facilitator, and I'm also a researcher. But I'm also a Gemini, which is sometimes controversial. I'm also a person who lives with a cat. And sometimes people are like, I'm like, no, I'm a person who lives with a cat. And I'm also a foodie, kind of like this. So that's kind of who I am. A little bit about two of the places where I've done work has really shaped who I am and how I think about consulting, facilitation, and human-centered design thinking. The first one was my time at Youth Prize, where I got to really work in the philanthropy and community impact space within the public and nonprofit sectors, working with organizations, family foundations, and community groups. And I currently work at Fathom Consulting, a consultancy that's actually just a few blocks away from here. And so we get to do human-centered design, facilitation, and research. And so we work with healthcare, medical device companies in the for-profit sector, with also Fortune 500 companies. And so one of the things on what I've always looked for in my community work, but also in my client work, are ways to build more equitable practices, right? More equitable spaces. And so this is where I've really honed in my skills as an empathetic listener, a qualitative researcher, and a human-centered design thinker. And so we have 45 minutes together, and this is, ish. And this is how I split our time. So I'll go over some identities, and we'll do an activity. Then we'll talk about the importance of design and equity. And then I'll close with talking about reflection and equity in our own work. And so two things I want to mention for today. The first is challenge by choice. So I want you to do what you feel comfortable with. And then the second one is I will have some points where I'd love for you all to get a little closer and chat with each other. So just prefacing that I might encourage you to get a little closer to each other and chat. But again, challenge by choice. And I say that because clarity is kindness. Okay, in 2020, I was in the basement of my parents' house going through old family photos, right? It was just that time to turn those physical family photos into scanned, digitized photos. I was amidst thousands of photos from throughout the years, and I found a lot of baby photos. And for some reason, my parents really loved to catch my mean bug face. And I'm like, what's going on? I was like, I had a pretty okay childhood, but the parents might have captured the photos in a different way. And so as I was going through all these family photos, I wasn't really sure what I was going to find until I found this one. And a little story about this photo is that these are my grandparents in 1980 with my two uncles standing in front of Mount St. Helens 1 month before its eruption. I almost couldn't believe this photo existed. They were Hmong refugees who were fleeing from the Vietnam War. And when I look at this photo, I can see how proud they are to be in some kind of Hmong, right? Some Hmong clothes in America. My grandmother even put on her big silver necklace herself, which is now a family heirloom in my family. And I grew up hearing their freedom stories told by my mom, my uncles, my aunts, and even them. And these are stories of crossing the Mekong River not once, but twice, and making sure that everyone was silent as they crossed the jungles of Southeast Asia. And, if it were not for them, I would not be standing here in front of you all today. And so as a kid, I grew up knowing the importance of being an American, that I can be whatever I wanted, that I am the daughter of refugee immigrants, and to be Hmong is to be a free people. And so I look at this photo and I see two people who are part of who made me and how I see myself. And so when we think about identity, our personal identities can be a lot of things, right? These come from the experiences and stories that shape us. Here are some that are often, here are some that are often thought about, kind of splayed across here, but some that might not be, right? So like living environment or dietary or hair type or tech access, right? Or hand dominance. But we also have gender and race and body size, ability, disability, socioeconomic status, among other identities. And so when we bring our identities into the spaces we occupy, some identities show themselves more than others in different circumstances. And that might look a little different in every group we're in, right? Whether it's a group of designers or your space at work or workshop you're putting on, kind of whatever space you're in, our identities take on different dynamics. And so from the practical approach to anti-oppression work, I love training for changes framework for mainstream and margin identities. And so the first being mainstream identities. These are the qualities, behaviors, and values supported by the group. And so folks with mainstream identities get to set the tone, the communication style, and the preferences that are accepted by the margins. And so these identities are often centered and accepted as the norm. And so with holding mainstream identities, it's often easy to assume that things are just like me. And with margin identities, those again are the qualities, behaviors, and values that are out of the center and often put to the periphery. And so when we think about the different parts of our identities, there are mainstream identities that fall within each of these, right? So an example for some of these could be being cisgendered or city culture, being right-handed, English as your first language, being an adult, or being tech savvy, right? These are examples of frequent mainstream identities that might show up within a group of people. But I also want to say that this is not to blame or shame anyone who has a mainstream behavior or quality, right? But rather to identify the ones that are around us and the ones that we ourselves might have. And so every person experiences marginalization in some fashion, and that can actually be used to build empathy towards when that person has a mainstream identity. And so for me, one of the things that I think a lot about is my American passport and what it means to have an American passport when I'm traveling around, and that there's a level of safety and mobility versus someone who might be undocumented or not have an American passport, and what level of safety and mobility comes with that. And so for me, that's kind of how I look at this. Okay, and so in our current culture, identities aren't static. We're more than just one identity. We have to be flexible and curious about how people are affected in the here and now. And our identities often shape how we move in the world, and our contexts are always changing and evolving. And so that's kind of my big disclaimer, right? Oftentimes identity is talked about me versus you, but it's not always like that in every context. It's always changing. And so when building an inclusive space for people, the best way to do that is to build those relationships and find ways to accept that sometimes you might get it wrong, but commit to making those changes to get it right the next time. So we're going to do our first activity. And if folks can pass out that cue to the committee folks, if y'all already have them or not. But with this activity, I'd love for you to take one of the pages that are going to get passed out and write on the stickies 7 to 10 things that define who you are. These can be personal identities, ethos, philosophies you bring into your work, the kind of work you do or identify with, or parts of your background that influence how you work, live, and are in the world. And so as these are getting passed out, for example, this is what mine would look like, right? I've included human-centered, again, person who lives with a cat, equity evangelist, along some other ones. And so once you get that, let's maybe do 4 minutes, 3 or 4 minutes. Again, challenge by choice. Yeah. Challenge by choice, right? These are the things that you get to do whatever you want. And I'm glad you found each other. All right. You will have some time in some small groups. You can keep filling them out as we are in some small groups, or if folks need like another minute. All right. Okay. So in groups of 2 to 4 folks, so you can turn around or get closer to some other folks, kind of start talking about what you wrote down or what you didn't write down. You can kind of talk about some discussion questions of finding what some are similarities, what are some differences, anything that surprised you, or just some of your general feelings. And what makes you want to ask more questions? Okay, so I'm gonna have y'all find each other. Okay, I would love to hear maybe 1 or 2 things from the large group. What did it feel like to find those commonalities or differences? What were some of the things about your identity that were easy to pull out or harder? And what did it make you might have left out? And again, this is like a challenge by 20. So I'd love to hear from maybe a couple of folks. Go ahead. And if you could actually say your good too. Yeah. Well, that and I'm like, oh, I didn't think about that. Like, you like, way back, like, where I think you like there. Maybe one more, Lori, or what did you come to terms with? Well, no, I feel that. I'm very much of both as well. I'm like, oh, I feel you. And then I'm like, oh, I feel you. That's why movies are always such a trip, because I'm like, stay away from the spooky, scary, because I'm like, I don't think my like central nervous system can handle that much spooky, scary. Um, I appreciate both things Similar sharing, and I hope this also was fruitful for you all to kind of have an opportunity to learn a little bit about each other. This is an activity that you can do with folks to, again, on paper, just write out for yourself, but also share with each other and find what that common ground looks like. So I appreciate you indulging me in a baby activity. Okay, so this is why I love design thinking. This is one of the first images that I was shown in my nascent design thinking days, where sometimes it kind of feels like this, and then you finally kind of get to a solution. But it's kind of a mess up front. And so this has always been one of the things that I always come back to, like, yeah, this is how design thinking feels like sometimes. And so you've probably seen this a lot throughout the day, commonly referred to double diamond. And while I still love this and refer back to it in my design thinking practice, I was always curious where community dialogue and community input come into play when going through the design thinking process. And so I was introduced to liberatory design in a Penn program I did in 2022. And, when you have one of those moments that feel like an internal tectonic shift, like this was my design thinking tectonic shift that really changed my design thinking practice, that really included an equity framework for design thinking. And so these are not only used in design thinking, but also as a mindset to carry with you in the world. And so there are 12 mindsets that liberatory design has. And a lot of what these mindsets aim to do is really bring self-awareness and intention into the design practice, help us recognize oppression and how we live and work, and find alternate ways of being and doing, and to expand our frame of reference for what's possible, and also inspire creative courage. And because our day is long, I recognize I'm the penultimate workshop and speaker, and our day is long and this workshop is short. I'm going to intro 6 of the 12 that I think are relevant to this year's World IA theme of context. And so this by no means that these are more or less important, but these as mindsets are really to be used creatively to combine, sequence, and embody in whatever ways works for your process. So I will assign some homework, but after today, you go and read all of them. They're free online and have a Creative Commons licensing. And so this is something that is a free and open resource for everyone. And so the first one is to build relational trust. I talked about this a little bit earlier, but really to invest in relationships with intention, especially across those differences, which it sounded like from the room, some of those already started, but also to honor stories and practice empathetic listening. And so this past fall, I did some in-home research with people who have diabetes. And for this research, I drove probably around 1,200 miles to have kitchen counter conversations in people's homes about their experiences with diabetes. And I asked them what was hard, how they're living with diabetes, and kind of their outlook on life. And while they shared their own stories, I also wanted to match them, right? As they were giving and sharing their stories with me, I also shared with them that when I was doing that research specific to diabetes, I think of my grandmother, the one in the Mount St. Helens photo who also had diabetes. And I remember as a kid holding my grandmother's fingers tight enough so that my mom could prick her finger to get another glucose reading, and could really empathize with these folks and their stories as they also showed me how bruised their fingertips were from all of the for the finger sticks that they too had to navigate diabetes with. And so this one is on practicing self-awareness. Who we are determines how we design. And when we look in the mirror, we see how we relate and how our perspectives really impact our practice. And in liberatory design, it really requires us to minimize the effects of our biases. And practicing self-awareness allows us to work with humility, courage, and curiosity. And so I think that's also why it's important to know yourself and your own identities and really understand what those mainstream and marginal identities are. And maybe when we don't know something, it could be valuable to ask, what's unfamiliar to me in this situation and why? And just pause for a moment of reflection. And so I also want to acknowledge that sometimes bringing equity into the work can be hard and messy, but it's important to really embrace complexity and stay open to the possibility of what can be designed from the mess rather than avoiding it. And so there's often like an urgent pressure to kind of like fix it or like develop solutions that sometimes actually like can be often harmful. And so just being open to keeping the door open and seeing what can continue to be iterated kind of from the complexity. And this actually makes me think of Adrienne Marie Brown's book, Emergent Strategies, where they explain emergent strategies, strategy for building complex patterns and systems of change through relatively small interactions is, to me, the potential scale of transformation that could come from movements intentionally practicing an adaptive, relational way of being on our own and with others. And that last line, movements intentionally practicing an adaptive, relational way of being on our own and with others. That part really always sticks to me. And so I say all this because sometimes we just need to slow down and make space for sense-making before decision-making can happen. And so our identities come with various power dynamics that, some might have unintended consequences. And so when designing, find the ways to design with instead of for, as we also heard today. And when framing the question, how might we, which we often use in our work, how do we ensure that the we is diverse and inclusive? And so what can participatory research and design look like for your project? And so during the summer of 2020, I was facilitating a youth giving circle with a group of young people across the state. And it was an online space during the time of the killing of George Floyd and the beginning of the pandemic. And these high school students were feeling hopelessness. They were also having a hard time adjusting to online school. And through a series of conversations that we were having with each other, we all worked that summer to create a youth-led grant-making process to push $25,000 to young people who were working on projects addressing food justice, college access, and mental health resources. And these were all things that the young people identified from the conversations that they were having with each other as important to them and also their peers. And so at the end of the summer, when the funds were distributed, one of the young women said to the group, "I never thought I could be part of something like this. I feel like I can talk about what's important to me now." And so I really hold that summer pretty fondly. And, I can only hope that they also thought it was cool, that they also held it fondly. But that's one of those moments where I really felt like I was working with the group of people who I got to facilitate with. And so sometimes when we're working, what we're working on can be high stakes, right? And sometimes those emergent processes or pathways can get a little stressful. Holding space for that fear and discomfort can also be a moment for reflection, to get curious and start naming what that fear and discomfort can look like. And so for me, this shows up as what I like to call project highs. I emotionally get itchy and start feeling scratchy all over when I'm uncomfortable and feeling that level of discomfort. And I will say it's taken me a little bit to be able to name what that is, but when it comes up, I can talk about it and navigate through it and when it shows up on projects that I'm working on. And so I've learned how to get through my project highs by needing like another person to kind of bounce ideas off of and find that collaborator, and also looking for those affirmations from my colleagues of like, "Did you hear that? Yeah, well, too. Okay. And so that's something too to like work through with the fear and discomfort. And so the last one I'll highlight is exercising creative courage. Oppression creates fear of change. And we're all creative within ourselves, and everyone you're designing with also has that creativity inside of them as well. And so it's to really invite people to share and hold space with them when you're designing. And I was actually just in a workshop yesterday with a bunch of healthcare executives, and we put a blank piece of paper in front of them to imagine and draw a future news headline. And a lot of them kind of scoffed and really didn't touch the paper at all. And I finally went around, I was like, okay, and like started distributing markers to the tables, and was just encouraging them that like, no drawing is bad. Like, we just want you to really think about, envision what this could be like. And when they finally did the imagining activity and we posted the papers on the wall to reflect back to them what their vision was, by the end of the day, it was the highlight of their workshop. They were always excited about it. They were like, oh, we want that one. We want that revenue stream. We want this one. And it was just a visual reflection back to them in a creative way for them to really see what that could look like. And so that for me was one of those like immediate reminders of like, yes, that's right. Everyone is creative and can come up with solutions for design. And so these mindsets are really to bring self-awareness and intention to our practice and really be able to kind of work through and combine and sequence and embody them in whatever way works for your process. And so these are the full 12 that are part of the modes of liberatory design as well. And again, for the modes, they have similar components to design thinking, but these are to be used as fluid and emergent stages that are centered in noticing and reflecting. Okay, I think I might have some time, but if you want to I'd love for y'all to just do a little turn and talk. So maybe 1 or 2 people around you and take 5 minutes to reflect with one another about like if there are any mindsets that resonate, something that you've used, something that feels new, and maybe how you can apply that to your practice. So I'll give you I'll give you about 5 minutes to chat with each other. Thanks for chatting with each other. I hope having a little space to debrief with another person can kind of give you a little grounding on how to think about these things. And so I have just a few more things to go over. One of the books that I've really come to love is one by Aimee, the Equity Mindset, Designing Human Spaces Through Journeys, Reflections, and Practices. She has 4 parts to what she thinks is an equity mindset. The first one being centering those most impacted by inequity, their histories, and their solutions. Centering clarity on how systemic racism is embedded within our society, our work, and our interpersonal relationships. Connection to one's personal relationship with power, privilege, and access. And the 4th one she has is a commitment to not just equitable outcomes, but evolving practices and processes that help us deepen equity, justice, and transformation within our spaces. And so that's one that I hold really close. And so Aimee also created a reflection action map that serves as a really great tool to use when you might be stuck, right? These are questions that ask about power and collective strategy, liberation, and so on, and really serves as a resource that asks questions to push us to reflect and think about how we're moving in the world or whatever project you're working. And so I want to leave you with some how might we, since I love a how might we because it sets us up for working on this together. And so how might we accept and acknowledge our own mainstream and marginal identities? How might we consider present and absent identities in the design of our work? How might we open up our design spaces to include people and perspectives as collaborators in our work? And how might we build in reflection and action as a practice in our work? And so take a deep breath. That was a lot. And so I just want to close with, I bring my identities and, into my work, whether it's the ones I grew up with, the ones I learned about, the ones I acknowledge or don't acknowledge, and bring those alongside my practice in storytelling and improv, my love for cycling and the outdoors, and also so much else into my work. And in 2022, I was in a healing circle where the facilitator opened it up with a saying that stuck with me to this day. And the facilitator said, you are not afraid of the stories you know. You're not afraid of the stories you know. And so I encourage you all to really bring your stories and you into the work and seek the stories of others. All right, thank you. If you want to connect with me, find me on LinkedIn.